I will do a roll call of the committee. Potts?
Present.
Hoffman?
Present.
Culler?
Present.
Delegati?
Present.
Hahn?
Present.
Jubileer? Kleppinger?
Present.
Mosser?
Present.
Redding?
Here.
Schuyler?
Here.
And Dambley?
Here.
Griggs?
Here.
Neer?
Present.
Rowland?
Here.
Eckel? Schaefer? And who just joined, please?
Yeah, this is Steve. I dropped off. I'll hang up if it happens again. Sorry.
Okay. You have a quorum, Juliana.
Thank you, Tom. I'd like to call the meeting of the Governance and Long Range Planning Committee to order this morning and thank everyone for starting the week with this meeting. We have two pieces of business today, and I think you all have a very short committee book that you were able to access on Board Effect, and also the revisions to the bylaw section were sent out to you, as well as the charges to the subgroups that we are putting together today were in your calendar. So if there are any questions as we go on the written materials, please just speak up and let me know. But otherwise, I will assume that everybody has the materials in front of them or was able to review before the call. The first item we will consider this morning is a revision to bylaw section 2.01B, which concerns term limits for trustees. You will recall that we had a discussion regarding this amendment to the bylaws in anticipation of making this change for the coming year at our meeting in September in person. At that time, we talked about what the current bylaws, as they have been drafted and are in effect now, what clarification was needed to ensure that the meaning that was intended when the bylaws were put together was in fact what was drafted. So we determined that we needed to have an amendment that would clarify that term limits were a total of 12 years, whether or not in consecutive terms.
Keith Eckel joining the meeting.
Good morning, Keith. We're
Good morning.
We're just considering and reviewing the discussion we had in September regarding bylaws section 2.01B on term limits.
Very good. I have it in front of me.
Great. So the discussion at the September meeting was both that the initial intention was to have a total of 12 years, and that is the current feeling of the committee. And so Frank has put together a draft that you have in front of you that clarifies that a trustee term limit should be for no more than a total of 12 years, whether or not in consecutive terms. Frank, is there anything in addition that you would like to say to further explain the bylaw amendment and what we're going to be considering as soon as we get a motion on it?
Only to just clarify that the provisions that accepted the ex officio trustees from this remain, so that this term limit does not apply to ex officio trustees. But otherwise, it's pretty self-explanatory, I think, and does clarify the existing language and set the overall cap on the number of years of service at 12, which is, I think, in the spirit of the term limit discussion, both in 2013 and then also back in 2002 when they put the original provision in place.
All right, terrific. Thank you. I think we'll have discussion on this, but why don't I take a motion first and a second, and we'll get the discussion going. May I have a motion?
This is Chris Hoffman. I'll make a motion.
All right, a second?
Second, Kleppinger.
All right. Open for discussion.
The only question I would have, Keith Eckel, and I think it's plain, but I just want to clarify that it is my understanding, if we approve this, that if someone is elected to that term and indeed is eligible to serve a partial amount of that term, they are able to fill that out even though that exceeds the 12-year limit.
Juliana, you'll see in Clause B2, there's a exception that would allow any trustee whose next reelection or reappointment would cause that person to exceed the 12-year limit to complete that term, but then not be subsequently eligible to be reelected or reappointed. That provision really only applies to Trustee Dambley. He's the only one that could fit into that category.
Okay.
The exception in Clause 1 applies only to Trustee Lubert, who has previously served 12 years, and this would allow him to complete his current term.
Thank you, Frank.
Yep. Thanks.
Any further questions or comments? All right, and Frank, I think before taking a vote, our intention is that the full board would consider this amendment as passed today by the Governance Long Range Planning Committee at the November meeting in 2.5 weeks. Is that correct?
Correct. That's correct.
Yep. And that would make it possible for this to be in effect for the elections in 2020.
Correct.
So if there are no further questions or discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. All right, motion passes. Wonderful, thank you. All right, moving on. Second order of business. We had wonderful discussion at the last meeting on several of the items and discussions that had arisen through our board assessment and the facilitated discussion retreat that we had at the retreat in July. We've distilled those questions for 3 working groups, and I want to thank everyone who's on the call and a couple of who are not on the call for agreeing to serve on these working groups and take up this effort over the next 3 months to put us in a position of considering changes or not, as the working groups recommend. I think that I would like to, for purposes of the public meeting, just go through the working groups very briefly and then open up for discussion the charges to the groups and how this process will roll out over the next few months. The first working group is the one on committee structure. Trustee Huffman has agreed to chair that working group, and the working group members will be Trustees Culler, Jubileer, Schuyler, Schaefer, and Ms. Griggs. Excuse me, I'm sorry, Mr. Griggs. And Frank has agreed to provide staff support. The comprehensive review on committee structure will include the scope of the committees, operating guidelines, which we are, as part of our committee charter, meant to review annually, and then committee practices with a particular focus on do we have the right committees? Do we have an appropriate scope of review and authority for those committees? Is the process for determining leadership of the committees appropriate, and the frequency of the committees? And I think we all had quite a bit of discussion around a few of the suggestions that other trustees and this committee have made regarding Committee on Diversity and perhaps other committees. My hope is that each of these working groups will provide a written report. It does not have to be extensive, but I do believe that capturing the analysis of the questions in a written report will be important for the entire board. And our hope is that we can get those recommendations in time for discussion at the February 2020 meeting of this committee. The second working group is on board size and composition. Trustee Hahn has agreed to chair that committee, along with Trustees Delegati, Kleppinger, Mosser, Eckel, and Ms. Neer. Frank has also agreed to support that working group as well. This working group is going to look at the board size and composition with a particular focus on whether the board size is appropriate. Is the current manner of election and appointment to the board appropriate, and is the board appropriately diverse? Again, hoping to have a written report back to the committee in time for discussion at the February meeting of the GLRP. Finally, we have a joint working group with ODCR on improving public dialogue. Abe, I know you're on the call. I hope you've agreed to chair that working group, along with Trustees Redding and our Faculty Senate President Rowland, with Lawrence Lockman as support to that working group. I expect that Outreach and Development and Community Relations Chair Barb Duran will have an additional one or two members of that committee that may be added to this working group subsequent to that meeting. And so I would ask that any motion to approve these working groups would include the ability to add another one or two folks to that last working group.
The joint work. Sorry to interrupt. This is Barb, and you will have that.
Oh, hey, Barb.
Hey, how are you? I apologize. I have so many committee members. I've been working through the ones I don't know to talk to them, see what their interests are. So I promise to get you very soon. My apologies, but thank you.
That's okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we can accommodate that with the right with the right understanding of the committee on the motion that's passed to charge these groups. So the joint working group on public dialogue will look comprehensively at the manner in which the board members interact with the public. Specifically, what are the objectives for interaction with the public, and are the current channels of public dialogue and comment meeting those objectives? I think an important part of this will be gathering feedback from stakeholders, and again, hoping to have a short written report back to both committees in a timely fashion. It would be great if we could do that by February. All right, that is the explanation of the different working groups that have come out of the discussion, as well as the specific questions that we are asking those working groups in delegation from the GLRP to consider. And so I think I would love to take a motion on all of these working groups together and then open for discussion, unless there's someone who would like to pull one of these off for separate motion. Is there a will to have a motion on all three at once to appoint the members and also the charging of the committee, of the working groups?
This is Kleppinger. I would make a motion to establish these three committees and the composition as listed in the agenda posted at board effect, with the understanding that the joint working group with ODCR on public dialogue has a couple of members yet to be determined.
Perfect.
Second.
Perfect. Is there a second?
Second. Reading.
All righty. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Open for discussion, questions, comments?
I have a brief comment. This is Nicholas Rowland from the University Faculty Senate. Do we need to agree on, or could I at least inquire about a process for involving non-GLRP members on the findings of the working group, or even participation in the working group, given that the third working group is a joint group?
So my first reaction to that is that I think that for purposes of planning and keeping this very focused, I would like to invite people to contact and talk to and put their thoughts into the working group members rather than asking non-committee members to serve on the working groups. There are going to be a lot of, I assume, a lot of phone calls and just an opportunity, I think, working through the members that are on the committees to be able to get, thoughts in to that process. I'm going to leave it up to the working group chairs to manage the process. I don't think there's any question. It's going to require some flexibility. I am going to try to be on as many of these calls as possible, but I think it's going to require, during the holidays and everything, a good bit of flexibility on folks' part anyway. So I would like to limit it to committee members.
And Julia, this is Barb. May I ask a question as a non-member of the committee back on the bylaws revision?
Sure.
Yeah, I just wondered, was it addressed, or does the committee think it needs to be addressed that about if you've served as an officer, let's say as chair, that those years don't count towards the term limit? And I wonder if that was, Frank, is that you?
Yeah, that provision has been eliminated.
Oh, it has? Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Nick, did you have anything further on the question that you asked?
Yeah, the piece that I'm interested in the most is, since it's a joint working group, the item on improving public dialogue, do we know how ODCR is appointing people? Are we working in tandem? Are we working collaboratively? If we don't want to have non-members in the group, how do we have a joint committee?
So I'm sorry, I did not understand the question. So it is members of ODCR and members of GLRP. So Abe is vice chair of ODCR, and in the list there you see a to be determined. Barb Duran, as chair of that committee, is working through discussions with new members of ODCR to determine, I think she just said, their interests, and will supply members. But it will just be made up of members of those two committees.
Understood.
And by the way, this is Barb. May I make a comment that I think this cross-fertilization across committees is very healthy and will prove to be very productive. So, Matt and Mark, thank you very much.
Yep. Welcome.
Okay, any further discussion before we take a vote? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
All opposed, no. Okay, motion carries. Great. We are running ahead of schedule here. The only other thing that I wanted to mention before we adjourn and ask for any other committee business while we're on the call is just to highlight that I think in our planning call it was you, Russell, Trustee Redding, who talked about the long-range planning part of the charter for our committee, and I think that was very well received by the committee, that we needed to spend some time on that this year, and we did put it into our planning calendar for GLRP. So one of the items on the agenda for our next meeting in 2.5 weeks will be for discussion around how does the committee best exercise its oversight responsibility with respect to long-range planning. So be thinking about that. We are also going to have a report from Provost Jones on the funded strategic plan initiatives and any reports back from the working groups that we've just established on their plans. So I look forward to seeing everyone in 2.5 weeks, and I guess at this point we'll ask if there's any other business to come before the committee before adjournment.
Keith Eckel, just a suggestion, actually 2 suggestions, and I'm pleased with your comment about long-range planning without question. That has long been a concern of mine back when I chaired the committee, that we weren't giving that enough time. I think that this current structure really allows us an opportunity to evaluate that with the working group on committees. And I think they should take a look at that as outlined. That specific issue isn't mentioned, but they obviously have the purview to look at that as they look at the work of committees, because I've had a long time concern about that without question. Mm-hmm. And the other comment I was going to make is, Frank, back when we entered onto about, I guess, at least a 2-year journey on working on improving the governance of the board at Penn State, Holly Gregory was engaged as the outside expert at that time. She did a piece, just a very general outline that I think was provided to the entire board on board effectiveness. And although it goes back to 2012, that might be a good outline reminder for all members of the committee of the things that we ought to focus on in governance. I don't know if you still have that available or not, but it might be a helpful piece.
I'm sure I have that, and I will resurrect it from the file and circulate it around.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Keith. Good point about the committee working group. Appreciate that. And I agree. I think we really have a good discussion, ahead of us on long-range planning. Any other questions, thoughts before we?
Sure. This is Nicholas Rowland. Mm-hmm. Just for sake of clarity here, once the working groups have completed their work and we have circulated our reports internally, how much feedback will trustees be granted before there's a formal group of, a formal vote of the full group?
How much? You mean before we have the before we consider the written reports at a GLRP meeting? I think that would be up to the members of the working group to solicit feedback from fellow trustees we would certainly, if we have reports that are available ahead of the February meeting and will be available for posting before the February meeting, just like everything else, that would be available to the entire board through the portal, and we would have that discussion at the GLRP meeting in February.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Have a great week. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.